Hello everyone, this is NBZ here. Before we start the episode, I just wanted to acknowledge the very tragic passing of Nintendo's president and CEO, Mr. Satoru Iwata, which occurred very recently. I'm sure all of you are just as shocked about the news as myself and Bali are, and extremely sad to hear. And unfortunately, we recorded the podcast before this happened, so there is no acknowledgement in the episode, but we will, I'm sure, talk about it in the coming weeks. For now, though, please enjoy the rest of the episode, and please understand. Rest in peace, Mr. Iwata. You will be missed. Hello everyone and welcome to This Nintendo Life. It's a podcast about Nintendo, if you didn't know. My name's MBZ and we're on episode 44 here. It's a very special show, lots of really cool stuff coming up, but before we launch into that, how about I introduce the person who's going to be talking about it with me. It's Bali. Hello Bali, how are you doing?
Hi MBZ. I'm really happy, because for the first time we actually got to play E3 games.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like, how is that possible? We don't live in the American lands, but we did. So, Bali, how did that happen? So, how about you lay out the show, I guess?
Oh, sure. So you're down in London, and in London at the moment there's an event on called Hyper Japan, and we were lucky enough to go to Hyper Japan. And the great thing about Hyper Japan is that Nintendo, both this year and I believe last year, were showing off their showing from E3. So all the games they were showing at E3, they were showing at this event, and we were able to go along and play them, which was really cool, really good. So for the first segment, we're just going to talk a bit about what we were playing at Hyper Japan at Nintendo's booth. So that's lots of good stuff. And then for our second segment, it's an extended segment to talk all about our first Backlog Club game, which of course is The Legend of Zelda, the Minish Cap. So we're going to really get in depth with that game and let you guys know what you think. We've got some emails coming up from you guys about that game and a few tweets as well. So yeah, look out for that in the second part of the show.
Yeah, big feature, and we will hope to do more of that in the future because it was a lot of fun. And yeah. It's one of those Zeldas that not many people talk about, so it's cool to like get an in-depth discussion going. So yeah,
and it is in-depth.
Absolutely. So Bali, how about we kick things off? We went to Hyper Japan, played all these E3 games. The first one. How about we talk about Star Fox? What did you think of Star Fox? This is, a very kind of controversial one from Nintendo's E3. I've heard many differing opinions on the controls, how it works. We got to play it for ourselves. How do the controls hold up? What did you think?
Yeah, so we went straight to the Star Fox booth. And it wasn't particularly busy. We maybe had to queue for like maybe 5 minutes. It wasn't too bad at all. And pick up the controller, which is obviously tethered to the machine, which in and of itself makes it a little clunky because this game is so like moving about the gamepad. It's quite crucial to the controls and the handling of this game. So having it tethered to a system was not a great start. So the guy's like, okay, pick up the control, and he said, oh, because you're going to be flying around, you're going to want to hold the control up. So I'm just like, lift the control up as it's tethered so it weighs like a ton, and I'm just like staring at the screen like, right, let's get started then. So I played the Corneria stage, and I was like, okay, this handles like absolute ass. Like, this is really not happening at all for me. I don't know what I'm doing. And I'll admit I didn't do the training mission, which probably would have helped, but I was flying straight in there, straight into Corneria, and initially it felt really, really weird, and it is that sort of, rub your stomach, pat your head sort of idea initially, and it's not much fun, to be honest, because the analog sticks, which both do independent things. Like, don't think that the right analog stick isn't being used, because it is, but it's used to speed up and slow down, whereas the left analog stick is your movement.
You can also use the right analog stick to do like barrel rolls and stuff, and like kind of bank left to right. And I'm not sure, like, can you bank left to right with the first analog stick, or is that not possible? I was kind of trying stuff out, and it feels like you have to use both of these in tandem to get anywhere, as well as using the motion control. So not only are you kind of rubbing your stomach and tapping your head, you're also like trying to get a third limb in there and, you know, rub your nose at the same time. It's kind of weird.
Yeah, it is weird, and it initially is really, really tough to get used to, because it looks like Star Fox 64, but it plays nothing like Star Fox 64. Star Fox 64 is believe it or not, is like a single stick shooter, because where you're moving your R wing controls not only the R wing but also the shooting reticle. So it's just kind of this tied to one gun that you're swinging around almost, whereas this feels, first of all, the gun is completely independent of where you're moving, and secondly, like you were just saying, the second analog stick is used to speed up, slow down, bank, barrel roll, etc. So it's really discombobulating.
It almost feels like a flight simulator in its complexity, because not only do you have all of that stuff plus the gyro, you have the ability to turn into the chicken, and we weren't even kind of sure how to do that initially, and lots of other different functions, like the different camera mode, which is more of a cinematic view that lets you lock on to your opponent and see kind of the best way to approach them from. So many buttons. It's kind of reminded me in some sense of like that minigame in Nintendo Land, the Donkey Kong one, where you're using all the parts of the gamepad. You're using all the parts of the gamepad in Star Fox, but it doesn't feel very intuitive, and that's very unfortunate, I think, in many ways. So
yeah, and I mean, I played through the whole first level of Corneria without even swapping to the chicken once, and I walked away from that booth thinking, like, first of all, I didn't have a good time. Like, that wasn't a good time. It was weird. It looked great. I thought the game looks nice. It runs well, of course, but it just...
I think a lot of that is being covered up by the fact that it's going at 60 frames per second, so you're not paying as much attention to the textures, which are not good, and the levels feel kind of empty and kind of barren in many ways. Like these open areas in Corneria, it's like, yeah, there's not much going on here, but it runs slick as a beast. Like, man, it's so smooth.
Yeah.
So that's good.
So, I mean, I was feeling pretty down on it, but we should definitely say we came back to this game later in the day, and I knew I was doing more. Because it was quieter later on in the day, I managed to play through both levels, Corneria and the second one, which is called
Area 3 or something. Remember. It's like the space,
Area
open
3?
space,
yeah. Yeah, it's just like an open space area where you have a showdown with Pigma, and the controls grew on me massively. I went straight to the Area 3 level first, fighting Pigma, and the sort of the cinematic camera, which is almost like it's similar to L targeting, but is slightly different in that...
Right, it all only just shows you where your enemy is. It doesn't necessarily orient you in the right place to face them and deal with them. You have to orient yourself, but it does let you know where they are, so you're not kind of constantly doing barrel rolls and kind of going upside down to try and find them in this vast expanse of space. It's much easier to see where they are.
And I thought, compared to Star Fox 64, where the dogfights, they're good, but you're always kind of left thinking, I can't really manipulate the controls and find where Wolf or whoever it is. So that camera really does help, because you can then just lock it on, line up your R-wing by flying in the correct direction, and then line up to go behind them and start shooting. And I thought that worked incredibly well. And for some reason, the gamepad just felt a bit more natural that time. I think I made the executive decision that I was just going to look at the gamepad less, because it's pretty disorientating when you look down at the gamepad, because I found you feel incredibly vulnerable, because, and this was something I was worried would happen before, like from E3, while seeing gameplay footage of this game was that you'd be flying in a straight line, aiming around with the gamepad, and just be taking shots or flying into stuff while you were aiming, and that definitely I felt was the case. So I just sort of ignored the gamepad.
That happened in Corneria all the time. Like, all the time. Just trying to get through this arch while also hitting an enemy, and you just kind of get into this horrible situation where you just like bam, 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 hit, take damage. Not nice.
Yeah.
Not good experience.
So, I mean, just ignoring the actual screen of the gamepad, but obviously still using the gamepad to aim the reticle, because you can still see the reticle of where the gamepad is aiming on the top screen. It just makes it so much more smooth. And don't get me wrong, there are times when the gamepad is useful, like when you want to shoot down below you on certain parts of Corneria, or literally just shoot at a right angle or something. So there are points where the gamepad is useful, but I don't believe this Nintendo ethos that you can actually, you know, fly looking in the cockpit and that it's actually really helpful, because it really isn't. I mean, it's very cinematic and works well from an artistic point of view, but it doesn't feel good.
It's impractical, really, and it's... I feel like I was worried about this from the very start when they said last E3, hey, we're trying to use the gamepad in this unique way using the gyro, and everyone, I feel, had kind of forgotten that they said that, but I always had it in the back of my mind, is like, this could be an amazing Star Fox game, but if they fuck up the controls, it could be garbage. So, yes, again, you know, when we went back the second time, I also felt better about it, and I also was using the gamepad less, which is kind of at a detriment to, like, the basis for the whole design of the game. But frankly, I think Miyamoto's, you know...
I mean, you're still using the gamepad. You're still using the gamepad, you're just not looking at the gamepad.
Yeah, the gyro is being used, but then it begs the question, like, why even use the gamepad in that case? Like, you'd be better off just using a Wii remote. But you also have to control it with these analog sticks, and there aren't enough inputs. So it's a hard problem to get around, especially just with the setup they have. But yeah, the Pigma fight was more fun, I think, and it was more because it was this open, vast piece of space where you really didn't have anything to knock into, so you didn't have to worry as much about that sort of secondary, you know, bumping and taking damage. And especially the cinematic camera helped a great deal there. And I think also... the lock-on system is easier when you have a charge shot, so you can charge it up and then kind of get a lock and just fire it away without having to worry about fine aiming. So that makes that kind of a more fluid process. But yeah, I mean, I walked away from Star Fox thinking, this looks really nice, it plays kind of weirdly, but I'm still interested, and I wasn't kind of walking away from it in a negative sense. I think maybe if we hadn't gone back for the second time, it would have been a different story, but it grew, so yeah.
Yeah, I think the second time round I played the Corneria stage again, like I mentioned, and I was swapping to the chicken robot thing. I knew all the controls. I was shooting different enemies in different ways. I was getting on top of the controls in general. I'd managed to go inside the final boss like they had done at E3 as the chicken suit. I knew what I was doing. The controls felt good, and I walked away from that second playthrough really positive, and like, I'm definitely getting this game day one. But yeah, the controls definitely do take some getting used to, but I feel like I got over quite a big hump between the two play sessions.
Yeah, so interesting one for sure, and I'm glad that we got to play it, because I wouldn't like to go in blind to Star Fox, kind of not knowing and then maybe being surprised in a bad way. Good one to have there. The next one up was Triforce Heroes, The Legend of Zelda Triforce Heroes, and this, they only had 2 kind of stands for it, so there were a maximum of 6 people who could play, which was okay, because there really weren't that many people going over to it, funnily enough. I'm not sure what the deal with that was, but...
I mean, they had eight Star Fox Zero Wii U's, and then 6 Triforce Heroes 3DS.
Right, but the thing
3DS
is with that is like each one has to be an individual part of the group, so you can't... It's not like with Star Fox where 8 people can play their own individual thing. You have 6 people, but they're all doing the same thing at the same time. So I guess you're kind of getting a similar number of people, but it's different setup.
Yeah. And I think like Star Fox is like a big mainline title that they are pushing massively, like Mario Maker, whereas they're kind of accepting that, you know, Triforce Heroes is a spin-off and it is a smaller game aimed at a smaller audience. So
yeah, absolutely.
it's all good.
Right, so Bali and I decided, we're going to go over there and play some of it, and we played with one of the reps from Nintendo who was there, and I find this like incredibly similar to like your complaints with a Nintendo Treehouse stream, Bally, because he was pushing us to use the kind of touchscreen communication tools really hard, and he was like, yeah, you can press these buttons and that's how you can communicate, and we're like, well, we can just talk to each other. We're right here. How about we communicate with our voices?
Yeah.
And like for most of the time, he really didn't speak at all, which was weird. He just kind of...
He literally didn't say a thing.
Yeah,
he didn't say a thing.
He just tapped on the gamepad trying to
the
communicate.
hell out of...
Yeah, it was fucking strange.
He was spamming the hell out of those emoticons, just absolutely loving them. And yeah, you're right. He definitely had some sort of message from some level saying, really push the emphasis on these emoticons, because remember, this game doesn't have voice chat, so we want you to use the emoticons.
It's part of the puzzle design, right? Right, guys?
If you're playing with two others, here's a great idea. Just stay silent and then just spam the hell out of the emoticons, and that will encourage everyone else to use the emoticons, and we can all be silent together, standing next to each other.
Yeah.
And yeah, so you're right. It was just you and me talking to each other. He was playing with us, but just talking through the emoticons.
Yeah, it was a fucking weird experience.
It was weird, but it was great fun.
Triforce Heroes is fucking fantastic, and I had a great time with it, and it's such a piece of shit that they don't have voice chat. Obviously, we're going to be using Skype, and that makes things way, way simpler, and you can actually tell people what the hell you want to do. But I would not want to play this game with just those touchscreen tapping pieces of shit, because there is a lot of kind of fine-tuning and specific things you need to tell each other. Like, we were playing this one level where you had to use bombs to eliminate people kind of across a gap. So I had bombs, and like Bali had the gust jar. So I'd have to kind of throw my bombs into this perfect position, get the timing just right so that he could gust jar at the appropriate moment. That sort of stuff, that communication is not fucking possible by tapping on goddamn pom-poms, for fuck's sake, you know? You have to be...
You can't just shout, over here, or totem time, in order to, like, get the bomb across successfully without, hurting anyone and exploding the necessary block.
Right, it's this very specific thing that we're trying to execute on, which just isn't available unless you can talk to one another. So, yeah, it's frustrating that is the case, but the game itself is really good, and it's also a little tougher than I thought it was going to be. I definitely think that, Bali and I are competent enough to get through it without having too much trouble. And we were like one of only 2 groups or 3 groups, he said, that were able to finish the hardest level on it, which we are pretty chuffed with. We beat the toughest level that they had available. And beforehand he was saying like, oh yeah, basically 80% of people fail on this level, and we managed to do it. So, testament to our Zelda skills.
They were like, is that a challenge
Yeah.
you're putting before us?
Yep, absolutely. So Bali, what do you think of it?
I was more positive on this game probably than you were going in, so my expectations were already quite high, and I think just the idea of playing with you in this rep, like, it just worked really well. He was decent. He had obviously played quite a bit of this game before, obviously, because he's a rep, and it worked nicely. I thought the puzzles are really good in the sense that we never reached like a big roadblock. Like, I feel specifically in 3D Zeldas, if you're going through a dungeon by yourself, there are often times where you just get to a puzzle and you're just like, I don't know what to do next. Like, and you have to go to a guide online, come back, and figure out the puzzle. I felt like in this game, the puzzles are designed almost so you get to them, and you'll only maybe struggle for, I don't know, 10 to 20 seconds, and then you'll work it out. And I think the idea of, 3 brains are better than 1, like, really does help, because someone will pick it up instantly and start saying, oh yeah, you need to get your bomb over here, gust jar there, do this, X, Y, Z, and it works really nicely.
It's kind of awesome, because it's basically what we did as kids with Zelda, where we'd both sit there, and obviously, we'd have the guide sometimes, but sometimes we wouldn't, and we'd kind of sit there and kind of put our heads together to figure it out. But in this case, both of us are playing at the same time, so it's that kind of thing where you're kind of cooperatively doing a dungeon, but this time you really are cooperatively doing a dungeon, and it's exciting.
Yeah.
It really is.
And I know you were worried about the difficulty. I personally wasn't worried about the difficulty because I had seen quite a lot of videos on YouTube of so many people just failing. And there are some tricky little parts. For example, you can't place bombs, you can only throw bombs. That's maybe a bit unfair because getting the right distance between bombs and throwing them is all a bit complicated. And I mean, the totem stuff is cool. That's a nice little puzzle mechanic, I thought. And yeah, it is a tough game. I think the bosses in particular are tough because they're like regular Zelda bosses. There are puzzles merged with action. So it's this idea of staying alive and also working out how the hell you're meant to beat these bosses. And they're really fast paced. There are some hearts available, not many, but I just thought those boss fights are incredibly well designed. And for example, with the worm on the final level we did. Level 4, the hardest one. That worm, I think it's called like ends with Mulgara.
It's in Link to the Past, Link Between Worlds. It's in all of.
Yeah, it's in all of them. But I love how this game just comes up with a really unique way of defeating it, where totems required. It chases a specific color of Link every now and then, and you have to work out how we're gonna get to that tail and slash it, and it's really cool. So I just thought we walked away from this game just so happy, like pumped for it because it was great fun.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be focusing on dungeons, and that's kind of probably my favorite aspect of the Zelda games. So. Yeah, and especially in those boss battles, it's not only you're contending with the boss, but you're kind of contending with space with the other players as well. And there are many times where, accidental things will happen, where you accidentally pick someone up and then throw them, and then a thing happens and it all goes wrong. So it kind of you are cooperating, but there is also a lot of room for screwing people over accidentally. And because you have a shared health bar, those screw-ups can be very costly. So. Yeah.
Like just getting in the way of someone using the gust jar.
Yeah, that happened
we lost
once,
a lot of hearts.
which was hilarious.
Yeah.
Like you were trying to get someone else over, and I walked in the way, and I gusted me into a gap instead. And it's like really funny stuff, but also oh shit, like we've lost all that life for no reason. So yeah. Next up, we did some bit of Chibi-Robo, Ziplash, which is a kind of small 3DS game coming out. I feel like this should really just be a digital thing, but they're putting it at retail because they can sell a fucking amiibo with it. God only knows. Amiibos.
Did you know it comes with an amiibo? I don't think the rep told us about that.
No, I don't think he told us enough about amiibos or anything. So, yeah, we played quite a bit of this. I did a kind of a longer level, so I was just sitting there for a while the rep was kind of hovering over our shoulder. It's weird, Valley, like playing these games when someone is kind of hovering over your shoulder constantly, kind of like getting you to ask questions. And we were asking because we know our shit, so we're asking like proper questions. And the guy's like, I don't really know, I can't answer that for you. It's like, great, what's even the point of this? All you can tell us is the PR bullet points that you've been given to tell. So yeah, that kind of sucked a little bit.
Yeah, I think just on the reps in general, like it's something we've never experienced before, is sort of playing brand new games that aren't even out yet with, like you said, someone standing over your shoulder, saying lines that they've been told to say, and they all seemed really passionate about Nintendo games, and that was cool. I wouldn't say that any of them were like more knowledgeable than us by any stretch of the imagination, which is maybe a little surprising. I don't know, but I mean, like you said, we think that they're sort of temporarily hired by Nintendo.
I think some of them are. Some will be in-house people.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely.
But I think in general they were very mixed throughout the day. For example, like with Star Fox, they just sort of asked me like, "Oh, have you played a Star Fox game before?" I was like, "Yeah, I've played Star Fox 64." Then I think he even said the line, "Do you play a lot of games?" I was like, "Yeah, I play a lot of games." And then he just kind of walked away. And it's like, nice. So now I can just get on with this myself. And I think for a gamer like me, that's kind of what I want, and I'm sure a lot of people who were there that day would like that. But I'm sure others who are like, I've never really played many games like this before, and it's quite nice having someone over your shoulder kind of helping you out. So I think it was interesting, but you're right. With Chibi-Robo, I think the guy was a bit like he was trying to sell this game that, at least for me, wasn't particularly innovative or interesting, and he was like constantly saying, "Oh yeah, it's really cool. Like, you can do this one thing with that whiplash thing. It's really innovative." And I was like, "Oh, is it? Okay, yes." And then, like, just kind of agreeing with him, and then yeah, he was. You're right. He hovered a lot, but I think in general it was just really interesting to see how they interact and the mix in the lines that they're saying. So that was a really interesting sort of experience.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to the people who actually know stuff, they're not the ones doing the demo. For example, we ran into, or we kind of spotted, ex-O&M editor Chandra Nair, who now works for Nintendo, does PR for them. And, you know, as soon as we walk into the booth, Bali's like, "Hey, is that Chandra from O&M, like the magazine that we read when we were like 13 years old?" And I was like, "Holy shit, yeah, like it is." Like, he doesn't have the red in his hair anymore that he used to always have. But, you know, it's basically, he was there snapping photos and doing stuff, and we went up to him and said hi, and, you know, talked to him for a little bit, which is really cool. But he's the sort of person who would know all that shit, but he's doing, you know, other stuff. He's not, you know, running the demos and stuff. So
yeah, and we should maybe mention there was sort of like a stage in the middle with sort of different things being shown off throughout the day, almost like a bit like a Treehouse Live.
Yeah, a
but
little
a bit more casual, maybe. Yeah. So there was a Smash Brothers tournament. They were showing off Mario Maker stages. They were showing off an awful lot of Animal Crossing, which we just could not care less about.
Yeah.
Which was interesting. They had some guy from Nintendo Europe there.
Yeah, I guess from Germany, because
cool,
that's kind of
but
like the head of,
yeah.
of where Nintendo is based in Europe. So
Yeah.
had those guys over doing
So
some
we
stuff.
weren't particularly interested in that, but just to point that out. But yeah, I mean, sorry, back to Chibi-Robo.
I mean, we don't
just
need to spend much
personally
time on it. It was kind of a very kind of middle
Yeah.
of the road. It had some interesting
Yeah.
mechanics to it. It's the sort of thing where I'd pick it up on sale, but I'm not gonna, you know, go in whole hog. It seems like another Nintendo franchise that is like, hey, let's just do a platformer out of this, and I'm sure it's going to be well made and polished and stuff. But yeah, I'm not going to, you know, be jumping out of my seat to go get that day one. We'll see how it reviews. I'm sure a lot of other people will talk about it, so we'll hear about it and get to it one day, I guess. But after that, we headed over to Mario Maker, which both of us were very excited to kind of give a go and see if we could play some of the Nintendo World Championship levels, and they did indeed have all of those on hand. I played the first one and managed to get my way through it after a couple of attempts. Actually, I'm not sure if I did die a couple of times and then managed to nail the jumps.
Yeah, but then you did it, yeah.
And then Bali was like, yeah, I'm going to take on the fourth level, and kind of pulled a Cosmo and had a very difficult time with that one.
Yeah, it was super tough. And we should definitely mention that we got some good video footage, so hopefully you can cobble together a bit of what we thought of the day at Hyper Japan.
Yeah, I'll be editing that video soon, and it'll be up on my channel at some point. So just keep an eye out for that, I guess. But yeah, Mario Maker's fun. It's hard to kind of give a good assessment from like a 20-minute demo, because really we were talking about it, and Mario Maker is the sort of game where you want to sit down at home and like design a proper level, really think about it, get creative, and then send it off to your friends and say, come at me, beat this level if you can. And I think that's going to be the real joy of that game in many ways. Is I didn't think that the creative aspect would get me, but after watching the stuff from E3, I actually am very interested and excited to get my hands on trying that stuff out. So
yeah, I thought it was predictable, but that's nothing against the game. That's just because we've seen so much of it, and I mean, each physics set handles like that given game. So I think there's nothing really new in that sense there. But yeah, the creativity is tough to do on the spot. We just messed around a bit trying to trick each other. This is a stupid thing. I made like a level with tons and tons of bloopers, thinking, oh yeah, that'll be really hard to get past. And then it turns out you can just like jump over the top of them, and just because you're on top of them, the hitbox means they die. So they were like basically used as platforms by accident, which was just a really sort of stupid cool thing I did by accident on the spot. And I think that's what that game is really good for, is that just really silly stuff that can turn into something quite cool. So yeah, I was impressed, but I was already impressed by that game. And yeah, day one purchase for me as well. And you're right, MBZ, it's the idea of creating a level for like a whole day and then sending it to you overnight, and then seeing what you think of it the next day. Like, that's where this game will probably sell the most to us, because I thought that was really good.
Yeah, I kind of think about this and how popular, games, like user-generated games on YouTube are, things like Happy Wheels and all these ridiculous, like, level things that people make. Mario Maker, I feel, is going to be a huge YouTube game for people to be like, okay, let's find the hardest level possible, and let's just try and play all of these. And I think that's going to be pretty big on that scene, and I'm going to maybe try and make some videos doing that too. So, we'll see how that works out. But Mario Maker is going to be it's crazy. It's almost like an endless supply of levels for these games that have come out so infrequently over the years. You think about the gap between Mario World and New Super Mario Brothers, and now essentially you can have Mario levels until the end of your life, which is kind of crazy when you put it in that perspective. But
maybe there's now no more 2D Mario games they can possibly make.
Right, and if they do make one, they have to innovate, son. They have to change something. So that's exciting.
Yeah.
Lots of good things to come from that. So, Mario Maker, still excited about that one, and it was a good showing. And I guess finally, we didn't play much else. I kind of dicked around some other areas.
Save the best till last.
Yeah, no, I mean, I kind of dicked around some other areas. We played some random Naruto fighting games and other anime weird kind of PS4 stuff happening over there, which I didn't pay much attention to, but I beat Valiant, so I'll take that. That'll be my what I enjoy.
Fair enough.
But we played Mario Tennis, which was on display, and we're like, yeah, we might as well check this thing out. Yeah, it's Mario Tennis, Bally. I don't really know what else to say about it.
Yeah, there was some glimmer of hope that they'd go for a sort of N64 style physics engine, and it's nothing of the sort. It's just the same as like GameCube for me. And they've kept all the power-ups that's random animations in the middle of points that just annoy you, and I just can't be bothered with it.
It's really weird because you get this Mega Mushroom and it just stops the play and makes this animation for like 3 seconds, which is so jarring, and you forget where the ball is, and like sometimes to try and react, like it's supposed to be a benefit to get this Mega Mushroom, but sometimes you'll get it and the ball is like in this place where you can't get back to in time because you've forgotten what the hell was going on after those few seconds. And it's terrible. It just messes with the flow of the game. It just really halts it, and it's just not doing anything interesting whatsoever. It feels like Camelot I don't know what they're doing, if they've been kind of reined in to be just like, just shit out a game. Who cares, honestly, at this point? Like, who the fuck's even going to play this?
That's what it feels like, yeah.
Which sucks, because, there's so much interesting stuff they've done in the past with those titles, so I don't know. It's like, it looks
Camelot made... I was just going to say, Camelot made the original like Game Boy Color and N64 games.
Yeah, they did.
They are great.
Yeah.
And they've just gone downhill.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's weird.
Well, what are you going to do? Mario Tennis is Mario Tennis. Maybe next generation it'll be something more interesting, but I'm not going to hold my breath for that one. Alright, well, I guess that kind of wraps up all the stuff that we did. We ate some nice Japanese food. I had octopus balls. They were very tasty. And then we kind of discussed the potential of why or where octopus balls would even occur, and that was interesting. Yeah, I don't know. It was a fun time. I enjoyed it. So I'm glad we went, Bally. It was good.
Look out for the video. It'll be good.
Yes, I'll try and get that up as soon as possible. But we are going to take a break here. Join us afterwards for our extended discussion of The Legend of Zelda: The Minish Cap. It is one that you will want to hear, so do not go anywhere. We will be right back. Alright everyone, welcome back to the show. This week, of course, we don't have any emails for you because we are doing a feature-long segment for our new thing, which is called the Backlog Club, which is basically a book club for video games where we pick one and we play it with everyone, and we encourage people to join in. And for our inaugural game for the Backlog Club, we are playing The Legend of Zelda: The Minish Cap on Game Boy Advance. And obviously this game is available to you in many forms if you haven't played it yet, if you want to play it before listening to this segment, because obviously we're going to go full spoilers here. There's not much you can spoil in a Zelda game, right, Bally? But, it's...
debatable. I'm sure there's the hardcore Zelda fans out there who say, no, all the stories are important and they link together, and yeah, so that is a questionable thing, but... perhaps.
We can tell you straight up that Minish Cap doesn't have the most enticing story, so if you're worried about that, don't be. So yeah, you can play it in multiple places on Wii U Virtual Console, and if you have a 3DS Ambassador, then you already own it, so why aren't you playing it? Go do that before you listen to this. So yeah, this is it's our first Backlog Club, so we're basically going to just talk about the game in depth and go into our thoughts on it, all of the details. We have some of your emails lined up, so I lied kind of, because we're not going to have an email segment. Instead, we're going to take emails from you about the Minish Cap, which should be exciting. So yeah, let's kick things off here. The Minish Cap, I want to start by talking about a little bit about the history of the game and when it came out, because we were alive then, unlike most Nintendo games, through the NES era where we weren't even conceived. And it came out in 2004, and funnily enough, this game came out in Europe before North America, which back then was really just not common whatsoever. It was kind of surprising that this game came out in November of 2004 and January of 2005 for the North Americans. And at the time, we were, reading magazines, the official Nintendo magazine. I think it was NOM at that time, instead of ONM. And, this game got great review scores. It looked really appealing. I never ended up buying it, but you, Bally, certainly did. What were your kind of initial, dealings with Minish Cap? How did you come into it? Was it a gift? How did you acquire the game?
Yeah, I wasn't massively into Zelda at the time. I mean, the only Zelda I owned was Wind Waker, and I'd played a bit of Wind Waker. I did enjoy it, but I wasn't... I don't know, Zelda didn't click with me initially, but there was something about this game, just from reading the NOM reviews and all the hype behind it, that I did get excited for, and the art style was definitely a big part of that. But I bought this basically on launch, played quite a lot of it actually in the coming months, and I got all the way up to the Palace of Winds, but I didn't actually do the Palace of Winds, so I had already played most of the game. And my impressions were really good, and this was the thing, is that I just never completed games back then. So yeah, like I said, I really enjoyed it, but only got up to the Palace of Winds.
Yeah, it's interesting that, because as we'll kind of discuss, Minish Cap doesn't have a great system to lead you in the right direction if you don't know where you're going, having kind of skipped the dialogue maybe. And when you're kind of dropped back into the world, having not played it for a long time, it's probably difficult to get your bearings again and know where to go. So that's partially probably the reason why after putting it down, you never went back to it.
Yeah.
And also, it's been so long now that you wouldn't want to restart from that point on your original GBA cartridge.
Yeah.
Seeing as you have the Ambassador version anyway, and you can play it on a nice 3DS, it's a good way to do it. So, that makes sense. I never owned it. And I was always interested, and definitely now is kind of when we're both going back and playing a lot of old Zeldas. It's one that sticks out because this game wasn't made by Nintendo. It was made by a developer within Capcom known as Flagship, and Flagship had experience with the Zelda series before because they had made both of the Oracle games, Oracle of Seasons, Oracle of Ages, which is funny because that era kind of post-Pokemon Valley when people were thinking, Nintendo have sold two games which are basically the exact same and are making double the money for it, essentially. Why don't we all do that? And I think the original pitch for the Oracle games was it to be 3 entries, so that it could kind of represent 3 parts of the Triforce, which would have been a nice, kind of neat touch.
3 times the money.
Yeah, exactly. But it seemed the development resources meant that it ended up being 2 instead. And so Capcom had made a Zelda game, so or this studio flagship had, so they were able to be trusted. Obviously, Nintendo, when these kind of projects go underway, they always have supervision. They always have people go in there and help them out. And the Minish Cap is, almost you couldn't tell that it wasn't made by a Nintendo studio, because it is extremely high quality and has a lot of elements from other games that you can easily recognize, and kind of fits nicely into the Zelda universe. At the time, Bally, I'm guessing you wouldn't have had any idea, had you not looked into it, that this wasn't made by a Nintendo studio.
Absolutely not. I mean, obviously Capcom would have flashed on the screen as I started up the game, but I wouldn't have paid any attention to that back in the day.
No, exactly. It was meaningless words to us.
Exactly, and it really does feel like a Nintendo game, in my opinion. Like it feels like any other Zelda game in many aspects. And yeah, it's just really interesting because it doesn't feel like a Capcom game personally, but I've not played many Capcom games.
Well, it's certainly no ridiculous Japanese lawyers shouting objections, so at least that's the thing. So you played it back then, obviously didn't get to the end, but now we're going to start talking about our current playthrough, our first impressions. And Bally, I guess what was the thing that first hit you when you booted it up? Was it the art design? Was it the music? These are your two stalwarts, the two things you very much talk about the most.
Yeah.
What do you think?
In that same vein, for me, I think the art design and music did stand out. Because before you get into the plot and you get into the dungeons, those are definitely the things in video games, for me at least, that hit you first. And like we said, this was only a couple of years after Wind Waker. And the interesting thing about this game is that the sprite designs and all the enemy designs and many of the different things in the worlds they're sort of sprite designs based on the art style of Wind Waker. So like you are basically playing as Toon Link to start with. That's really cool in and of itself. But I mean, a big game that I loved way back on the GBA was Harvest Moon Friends of Mineral Town. And I really feel like the sprite design and just the way that the towns are designed feel a lot like a Harvest Moon game. And obviously the sort of semi-fantasy aesthetic, and there are farms in the game, obviously, and things like that. Like, it all feels quite Harvest Moon, and sort of the start of the game when you're going to the main town, and there's the festival. Like, there's so many festivals in Harvest Moon, so
right.
That felt incredibly sort of Harvest Moon. But obviously the difference with Harvest Moon is you have your happy festival, you go back to your farm, you start working on your farm, and then you have another festival. Whereas in Zelda, whenever a festival happens, everything always goes downhill afterwards.
Yeah,
so that's when you realize, oh wait, this is Zelda, this isn't Harvest Moon. But yeah, like I said, the art design is like a merging of Harvest Moon with Wind Waker, and I really like that, because at the time those were two of my favorite games.
Yeah, it's really colourful, and that's very important, I think, especially on the GBA. Before the SP came out, it had to stand out on the screen. I remember lots of people talking about how
the SP was
Castlevania was it at this time?
Yeah, I have, because it launched with its own special golden.
The Zelda Special Edition SP.
Zelda Special Edition SP. I even want to say the SP might have come out at the same time or just a few months beforehand.
I think it was kind of a simultaneous launch. I seem to remember there was a Mario edition and a Zelda edition.
Yeah, Mario vs. DK. Yeah, another game we played. But yeah,
crazy. But I do still think that they made it in mind with the original GBA, because there were lots of complaints. Obviously, games like Castlevania Circle of the Moon were really dark and hard to see because there was no light on the GBA.
Or you look at a game like Metroid Fusion, where they just pump it up in terms of the color design.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, traditionally, Metroid with Super Metroid wasn't super colorful.
Yeah.
There was, kind of very dark atmospheric moments in that game, but Fusion was just like, hey, let's make sure you can see Samus, so let's make her yellow and blue, right? How about that? That's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
So yeah, that stands out. Also, I think it's really well animated. Like, the way that he walks and kind of the bobbing of his head and the sword swinging, and we'll get into the kind of the mechanic stuff later, but it just feels smooth to play. Now, I don't think it's running at... Actually, I'm not sure. I can't even tell. It's hard to tell frame rate with a GBA game when I'm not thinking about it. I think if I go back to the game and look at it now, I'd be able to tell. But it seems like 60 frames a second. Maybe completely
do
wrong
any
on that.
GBA games run at 60 frames a second?
I don't know. Funnily enough, I was just watching a bit of Chugga Conroy's Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga Let's Play, which he just started. And either he sped up the game or something, because it's running at 60 frames a second, but it looks really unnatural. It looks so weird and fast, and I don't know what has happened there or what's gone on, but yeah, I'm not sure. The GBA is not really the most powerful system in the world, but there are Super Nintendo games that ran at 60 frames a second, so I don't see why it couldn't. Yeah. In any case, yeah, and I think, when we're talking about the music side of things, very Wind Waker influenced as well. There is a lot of that stuff repeated, and for that reason, I didn't play the game with the music turned on all the time, because I knew a lot of these songs. I just didn't feel like I needed to. Minish Cap is more one of those games where, because it's a handheld thing, I can kind of wander around and not have to worry about, turning it off or anything, because you can close the lid when you have to do something. So I'm not, committing to it in the same way as I do with a console Zelda. So I'm not kind of absorbing myself into it that much. I know you play games very differently to me, Bally, in that sense.
Yeah,
I always have your headphones on,
absolutely.
listening as you play.
I try to play sort of Wii U games and 3DS games in the same way. If it's the first run through of a story-based game, and especially a Zelda game, I will definitely make sure I get all the music definitely on the first run through at least.
Yeah. I remember a funny pseudo argument we had about the art style of this game, because in my mind,
at the time, or
I think this was more recently,
okay.
But a while ago, when I thought that the Link to the Past art style was the exact same as the Minish Cap art style, and I swore up and down. Obviously, I didn't have enough context back then. Looking at it now, obviously, Link to the Past looks completely different in terms of the Link character himself. He is based off of the original artwork from The Legend of Zelda, whereas this character is clearly Toon Link. Absolutely, the blonde hair and kind of just the way he moves and walks and everything. He is a different incarnation of Link.
Yeah.
So I will retract my terrible argument.
I'm glad I won that one.
So you have that one on the books. Absolutely. But yeah, so it hit me pretty hard. It was a really nice thing to load up and be like, hey, this game looks nice, it sounds good, we're in for a good time. And then we kind of get to the story setup, which you get to the festival, and as we were talking about, festivals always go wrong and bad things happen, and that certainly happens here. I actually found this really interesting because, having recently played Chrono Trigger, that game starts in a very similar way, where you go to a festival and you meet this girl, and you're both running around the town and doing things and seeing the different attractions, and she wants to buy some candy, and then you're like, oh, come on, let's get a move on, I need to move on with this game, but she just wants to do everything. Zelda herself is very similar to that, and I feel like a little bit of inspiration was drawn from Chrono Trigger for this opening sequence.
Because you're left following her around the town as she's going oh, look at these vegetables I can buy, or look at this milk or whatever. It's really you're just left, and it's forcing you to actually explore the town while doing that, which is quite nice.
Yeah, it's a bit of a more limited movement you have. It's more the central area where the main kind of houses are. You can't go around the whole town in that section. But it was very talky, and I remember when I started playing this on the Ambassador program when it came out, I didn't get very far. I just basically played the first 10 minutes doing this section, just talking to people. Very wordy, very dialogue heavy, and I was like, not sure I like this that much. Thankfully, Minish Cap doesn't indulge too much in story elements and dialogue, and it's kind of front-loaded in that way. But we were talking before, Bally, about how we like the fact that Zelda is more of a character in this game, that her, that she's a childhood friend, similar more to Skyward Sword than Ocarina of Time, where in that game, as you're playing right now, Zelda is just this princess you find, and then she tells you to do a thing, and you don't have that kind of connection, whereas this game is she comes to your house, and she's like, hey Link, come on, we're supposed to go to the fair, and clearly there is a relationship that has previously been built there. before you start the game.
Yeah, it's almost like there's less of a class structure. Even though you obviously have a royal family and they obviously rule the land, it feels like the queen or the princess can speak to anyone. Whereas definitely with Ocarina of Time, Hyrule Castle, and the sort of the class structure is so clear based on like the number of guards surrounding it, and you're just like this boy from Kiri Forest, poor impoverished person who just comes into Castle Town. So there is that definite distinction between the two.
Yeah. Do you think that Zelda is allowed to go out, or do you think she's sneaking out on her own, trying to like
in Minish
see
Cap,
Link and yeah,
I think it's free roam for her. I don't think there's much of a. It doesn't feel like there's that big divide like there is in Ocarina, like I said.
Yeah, well, I think the reason I ask that is because in Chrono Trigger, the girl who you meet is the princess, and she is basically like sneaking out because her parents don't want her like with the riff-raff, essentially.
Yeah.
So she is kind of like going under the radar. So I just thought it was an interesting comparison there between the two of them. So yeah, obviously bad things happen. Vaati comes along, and again, another neat story touch, and we're not going to so far we're going very chronologically here. The story beats, let's talk about them. But I just want to mention that Vaati opens up this, is it a chest? I can't remember what it is, and like evil things. It's basically Pandora's box, and evil things throw out into the world, which is really cool because it basically gives justification for why there are all these enemies roaming around the fields. They set that up as a story point, which I just thought was great. It's a neat little touch, and subtle world building in a sense. That it's not just the fact it's a Zelda game you have to kill enemies; they give you a reason for it.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, that was nice. I liked that. That was pretty cool. All right. Well, yeah, it was good first impressions. I feel like we can move into talking more about the structure and the world and kind of how dense it is and a lot of the mechanic stuff. One of the first things I noticed as soon as I got my sword ballet was, man, this thing is just like Link Between Worlds, and I love that, in the sense that you can mash the button as quick as you can, and the sword will respond instantly, and you can just go and slash your heart's content. That's a criticism I have of Link to the Past, that you don't have as direct control over the sword in that way.
I would argue they fixed it for Link's Awakening, certainly, because you can certainly mash your sword in that game as well.
Right. But it's good. It feels good, right? It feels, like a nice way to play.
Yeah, no, it should be in. I'd even potentially argue for it in 3D Zeldas at points.
Yeah.
Where some fights can get frustrating, and you definitely need the ability to mash the button, as I'm sure we'll get to with certain enemies in this game.
Right, and bosses as well, which you can definitely defeat quicker if you're mashing faster and like kind of going through their segments. More quickly than the designers probably intended you to, but that's an interesting thing. So let's talk about the world then, because we mentioned Castletown a little bit about how there are lots of people there at the start. That doesn't change. There are lots of people there throughout the whole game, and in fact, that whole town, though it's the only town in the game, is so incredibly dense, and by the end, I still couldn't really find my way around it, which is really surprising.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, like, I knew kind of the bare bones of where I needed to go for stuff, but then I was like, oh wait, if I want to get to this place, I need to turn into a Minish by going into this house. Like, there are lots of different elements there by using the kind of transformation from big to small that makes traversing that area a little bit more convoluted than it should be, I feel.
I really liked Castletown in the sense that because it was that main big one hub, it became like almost any time you ever got stuck, you knew the solution would be in that town. And obviously you didn't know where the solution was in that town, and you could spend sometimes hours even looking in that one town trying to speak to the right people to work out what to do next. But I feel like the game always dragged you back through the town, certainly between dungeons and to advance the story and things like that. And I really liked that.
I mean, it is a very central area on the map,
Mm.
right? So like it's kind of your crossroads. Like there's four pathways intersecting, so there are four elements that you need to go out and find. So hey presto, guess what they do? It's not quite as simple as that, but yeah, they do put you through there a lot, and there are lots of different characters. And I think the one criticism I have in terms of navigation in this game is, yes, the map exists, but you have to pull it up in the same menu where all your items are and where all your stats are, and like navigating across to that can be a little bit annoying at times, especially when you're constantly using the menu to switch items in and out because of the lack of buttons on the GBA. And once you want to navigate to like a certain quadrant, you have to click another button to kind of zoom in on it, and if you unpause and then repause again, it doesn't stay on that quadrant. It's zoomed back out to the main map, which I think is just like a kind of design thing that they should have thought about. It's like, if someone want to constantly check the map, they don't want to keep switching, and it's a bit of time wasting.
I do feel sorry for them because there was a certain lack of buttons, certainly, to try and get all that stuff, get to grips with all that stuff. And they decided that the select button, for example, which could have been a map, they decided that was going to be your means of talking to your companion Eslo. And I actually really liked that decision personally, because whenever you're stuck, just hit select, Eslo will be like, oh, Bally, you need to go and do X, and it'll just it doesn't tell you often in black and white terms what to do next, but it'll give you a clue as to sort of the direction you should be going.
I actually never knew that.
Oh really?
I
used it a lot.
I
used it a lot.
Yeah.
And I don't think the game, and that's another thing, I don't think the game really ever tells you that, or if it does, it maybe only tells you it once when you first get him. But yeah, I found that really useful.
So what do you think about Eslo in general? Did you like him as a side character? I personally felt that he is one of the least intrusive side characters that you have.
In a good way, or you wish he
in a great way, in the sense that in Ocarina of Time, Navi is always shouting up your arse. In Skyward Sword, Fi is so emotionless and not really that interesting. He felt like kind of a Midna, nice in-between, where he's a character in his own right, and he is actually kind of a big part of the story, but he has to come along with you. And he's also not annoying. He doesn't constantly interject. He only talks when he needs to. And, I don't think the game is particularly well written, but I think the stuff they give to Eslo is pretty good.
I like his backstory. This idea that, and this is spoilers, but obviously we've warned you of that. But he is a Minish who was like cursed by Vaati and turned into this hat, right?
Yeah.
So that's a cool little backstory, and as you get I think about halfway through the game, you do get a big chunk of his backstory and his relationship with Vaati and how that all works, and it's quite neat, and I like that. And you're right, he doesn't annoy you too much, but he does certainly start a few cutscenes and start talking, and the fact that he is your hat that sits on your head, that's quite quirky in and of itself, and he's good. He works well.
Yeah, I like that there's, sometimes they can get a little bit bogged down in telling you things, like in Skyward Sword. It's like, oh, there's a 96% chance that this will happen. Let me talk to you.
Oh, Fi is like the worst. Like,
yeah. And yeah, generally, Minish Cap isn't very invasive, so that's some good stuff. So let's kind of talk about the Minish themselves then, because that is the main mechanic, should we say, the main theme of this game is the transformation using the hat between Big Link and Small Link. Obviously, it's kind of the crux of many puzzles, as you said before. You can explore different areas and cultures because of the Minish have like little kind of cities and towns of their own that you wouldn't be able to see otherwise if you were kind of big sized. What were your feelings like back then when you first encountered the Minish Cap for the first time when you were younger versus now? Do you think it's held up over the years as a cool mechanic?
Definitely. I think that first route to the first dungeon where you're in Castle Town, you're told about the Minish, you have to go and find the Minish, so you've you adventure through the woods, you discover Eslo, and then you discover this tiny, tiny town that you shrink down, and the lead up to this town, before the first dungeon, like you're walking as a small Link under these leaves, and the animation when you're walking under those leaves and sticks and twigs and things looks really, really good. Like the sprite design of that is amazing.
It's kind of a form of vertical parallax as opposed
Yeah.
to in its traditional way that it's used in a kind of side-scrolling game. This is like a over-the-head game using parallax in a different way, and it's a very effective technique.
It works
It gives
so
that sense
well.
of depth. Yeah.
A great sense of depth, and by the time you reach that village, you're like, wow, this is amazing. Like this idea that there's these little people that are living in the Deepwood Shrine, etc., and then you go on to the dungeon and etc. But I love the idea that there's these small towns scattered throughout the world, and that because when you first boot up the game, you think, oh, Castletown is the only town in the game, and that's not strictly true, because there's all these little towns with the Minish across the world, which works so well.
Yeah, it's cool because it's not just a way of, you know, finding different characters and moving through the world differently, but they implement it into the puzzle design, and there are instances where there are bosses where you have to become Minish. Which dungeon is it where it first appears? I can't quite remember.
It's the third dungeon, the Fortress of Winds, where it's the Godin style boss. So big head, two hands.
Right, so it's a very traditional style boss where you have basically
Yes.
the two hands and the eyes, but they subvert that really well. It's kind of a really smart choice, because traditionally it's like take the arrows, shoot the eyeballs, and then hit the guy a bunch. It's completely different here, where you have to.
Well, you still do the arrow shooting, don't you?
Right.
But then you think after that, oh, wait, no, I don't just slash at the central part. I actually have to become small, walk up into the central part. You realize there are these rooms that you have to access inside the boss while you're small. And
Right, it's
start
almost like
attacking.
going inside a robot as a
Yeah.
tiny creature and like redoing the internals to kind of reprogram it almost.
Yeah.
By defeating stuff inside. It's such a cool idea, and they do that again, like at the end of the game with the final boss in a sequence which I thought was cool but also confusing as fuck, and we'll get to that when we talk about it. But yeah, it's. I think the little problem with it is it's made a bit obvious when you need to turn into a Minish Cap, and it has to be because not into a Minish Cap, into a Minish.
A Minish.
It has to be obvious because there are only certain ways that you can become small, so they have to have like that kind of square platform for you to jump into. So obviously you walk into a boss room, you see that, you're like, oh, well, of course I'm going to have to turn tiny. And there's nothing you can really do about that unless you kind of make a design choice later on, like in Twilight Princess, where you can transform at will, to be like, hey, you can now transform to be tiny at will. I think it would have been nice for them to do that maybe, instead of making it really obvious that you're like, oh, I need to turn tiny to, you know, beat this boss.
Yeah. The only downside with that is it just completely unravels all those puzzles
Yeah.
that are scattered, especially in Castletown, where, for example, you get a weapon called the Cane of Paki, where it flips pots, and you use those pots to then shrink, and you have access to new areas, etc., etc. So there's sort of there is real depth to the way the items link together that can incorporate that ability to shrink down and then explore more of the world.
Yeah, it's certainly this splitting between two universes that feels similar to Link Between Worlds itself, and even Link to the Past. And we actually have an email kind of touching on this subject from Cal. So, Bally, do you want to read this email out?
Hello, MVZ and Bally. I live in the United States, specifically Oklahoma. I would like to start out by thanking both of you for motivating me to finish this game, as I've had it on my Wii U since December of last year. I'm very glad that I got to fully experience this game, as it is often an overlooked Zelda game. This game has many similarities to A Link Between Worlds in that there are two worlds that connect, allowing for further exploration and different puzzle elements. I also felt that the 2D style harkens back to A Link to the Past, and the Kinstone side quests were similar to finding all the Mai-Mais in A Link Between Worlds. I hope this backlog series will continue. Thanks, Cal.
Yeah, and that kind of thing with Link to the Past, where obviously there are points like you were talking about when you played it earlier this year about trying to position yourself in the dark world so that you can transport yourself onto a different area. Especially,
Yes.
it's like the first area in the dark world where you need to stand in a certain place so you'll be on top of a cliff in the other world.
Yeah.
It's very kind of similar to that,
But
and
more streamlined.
yeah, absolutely. And it's not more. It's less confusing because you can't kind of do it anywhere you want. It is regimented in the sense that yes, you can go tiny, but here are the bounds within which you can do that. It's not so open-ended. I think Link to the Past is way more open-ended and more kind of aimless in a sense of being like, okay, how do I get up there? I don't know. I'll just keep
Yeah.
going between worlds here and again.
And it's almost like that was more to do with the game design at that point in time. Like, I don't know. I feel like games evolved to be a bit more handholdy for certain things like that, especially when it's, with, for example, with Minish Cap, where it's the crux mechanic of the entire game. The ability to shrink small. I feel like they really kind of drilled it into your head how to do that and what to look out for and things like that.
Yeah, they make it obvious, which is nice. It's good. So yeah, I mean, the world itself is not too kind of out there when it comes to the different regions. I feel like it sticks pretty closely to what you expect from Zelda, where you start with a kind of forest area, you go into a fire area, then you go into kind of a watery area. I think the winds is a little different, and then there's the sky. How did you feel about the different locations, Bally? Were they different enough for you? Did you feel like they could have done something more interesting there?
When I play a new Zelda, I'm not expecting it to sort of redefine the tropes of, you know, desert, forest, water area. I think those are they might be quite simplistic places to go back to, but I think they work well. And I think that the second we started having Zeldas without a Lake Hylia, without a mountain, without a forest, people might start thinking, well, this isn't really Zelda. Like, I feel like those have almost become so generic tropes of the series that it's quite hard to move away from them, and I think that this game uses those really well. And like, for example, with the very first dungeon and shrinking down in the Deepwood Shrine, you're experiencing a forest as a tiny little Minish, so you're getting the leaves that over the screen that we were talking about earlier, so it feels different to just your generic forest.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of the fact that there is a different perspective on it makes it unique, and especially when you get to the boss of that dungeon and it's a chew, just a normal chew, but you're tiny in comparison to it. It does buck that trend in a sense. Yeah, so instead of going through the forest, you're just like in a tree, like one kind of part of a forest. Yeah, interesting.
And I think it's only Deepwood Shrine and I think Temple of Droplets. I think they're the only two where you actually play the whole dungeon as a Minish.
Yeah, and then to top where you basically shrink and have to do it.
And to top it off, it's very clever, like you said, where the final boss is actually just a regular enemy, but then because you're a Minish, they become this massive boss, and that works really well. So you get the Octorok later with the Temple of Droplets, and that's a really cool boss as well.
Yeah, it's a really hard boss as well, and it's really funny in comparison to you go back out into the overworld and you slash an Octorok and it dies once in one hit, and it's like, oh great, I wish that I had that power at that point in time, which would have been nice. But the world itself feels quite small when you first look at it, essentially, because you get the map and you're like, is that it? Like
how on earth are they going to fit everything in this?
Right, how are they going to do a full-blown Zelda in this tiny, tiny area? Was that kind of shocking to you? But I think maybe because you played it before, you knew that it was a bit bigger than it initially seemed, Bally.
Yeah, I mean, I knew that this game has more depth than what's on the surface from playing it before, but I think that you have to realize that it's not trying to be like Link's Awakening or Link to the Past or Link Between Worlds. It's not, well, Link Between Worlds wasn't out, but it's not trying to be that style. And when you actually break it down into the structure, so it's got 6 dungeons which is actually the same number as Wind Waker, it's actually much more easy. It's easier to compare the structure to a Wind Waker or a 3D Zelda, because that's what the pacing feels like. Like there is quite a bit to do between dungeons, and like it's only got 6 dungeons, like I said, but I still spent 17 hours on this game, and that wasn't just me exploring and things like that. Although I did do a lot of that, but there's an action.
It was you sitting in the figurine shop,
getting my figurines, exactly.
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to say is that there's plenty to do between dungeons, and I feel like games, specifically A Link Between Worlds and A Link to the Past, they're so fast paced, and I feel like there's very little build up between dungeons in those games, whereas in Minish Cap it feels so much more similar to a 3D Zelda, where there's a big build up, where they say where they might do something like, where here's a community, here's the issue that community is facing, you have to work out how to get to the dungeon, and then here's the dungeon, and then you help the community. Sort of that sort of trope that is so clear in games like Ocarina of Time, Wind Waker, Twilight Princess, all the 3D Zeldas. That I feel like Minish Cap goes for that way more, and it works really well.
And it's interesting because the communities that you're helping are the communities that no one knows exist, because they are tiny and they live in these little holes, which is interesting because it's like people who live in Castletown generally just like are very insulated. They just stay there, don't wander about. When you get up to like the Death Mountain-esque area and you find this little hut where they all are, they're like, oh, you need to go to this place and, you know, save the area, essentially.
Yeah.
Although I don't feel like they're in dire need. It's more like you need your blade to be reforged, and so in the meantime, you know, you might as well just occupy yourself by going.
Dire need, and it's not like Ganondorf has completely destroyed or like set a being in their sacred place that they normally worship, or something like they do in Ocarina. So you're right, it is a bit less intense.
Right. Well, I mean, talking about how it's similar to 3D Zeldas, let's talk a little bit about the dungeons themselves, because I felt probably the strongest part of the game were the dungeons, and they are very similar feeling-wise to a 3D Zelda, in the sense that you can't knock through these in 30 minutes like Link Between Worlds. They are lengthy affairs with many rooms, many levels, many puzzles, and different transformations happening. And there aren't many of them, but for good reason, because they're all really deep and involved. Bali, what were some of your favourite dungeons in the game, the ones that stuck out to you?
Obviously, like I've already said, the Deepwood Shrine, that initial you shrink down and you experience all the leaves and all overhanging things on the screen. They keep that going throughout that dungeon, which I really liked. I think my favourite was probably the Temple of Droplets. So the main mechanic of this dungeon is quite clever, actually, and I think they'd even copied this from Mario Sunshine, I want to say. So it's you use the gust jar on a lily pad to sort of propel you forward across water. Now they do use this mechanic back in the Deepwood Shrine, but they really focus on this mechanic in the Temple of Droplets, where you're constantly getting on your lily pad, you're going through these sort of mazes of waterways, opening doors, opening waterway doors, not just regular doors, and allowing you to get that lily pad throughout the whole dungeon. And there's some really, like, this dungeon took me a good hour to an hour and a half or so. And like we said before, it's got the Octorok final boss. There's some really good sort of ice, moving blocks about on ice puzzles going on in this dungeon as well.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of Pokemon Gold and Silver, where you're going through the ice caverns, you're navigating those areas and trying to like get through. It's really funny, like the memories I have tied to that game is because everyone got stuck at that part, and I was kind of naturally good at it, and I knew how to get through it, so everyone would come to me with their Game Boy and be like, can you get me through this place, please? I need to get through the dungeon. So I would just do it for everyone. I'd just like go through and do the puzzle. So that sort of stuff was really satisfying for me, because it's more complex than the stuff in Pokemon.
Yeah. It took me a few times.
Also,
I had to reset the room like 3 times.
Yeah, you have to go back and forth to reset the blocks into their original setting, and you really have to think about it, like, okay, how do I make this get on this switch? And you know, the stacking stuff works wonderfully. It's used well throughout the dungeon, but it's not overused, which I like. Like, there are maybe 2 areas that it's done, and they're both in kind of different ways, and you're not burned out on it. So they're always doing new stuff and keeping it fresh, which is good. You want a dungeon to do that.
Did you have a favorite dungeon?
I really like the setting of the sky one. I think that was just a
Palace
really
of
cool
Winds,
thing.
yeah. That's a really interesting dungeon, because you get halfway through it and you think, because you go through the boss door at halfway, and you actually fight what turns out to be a mini boss, and then it reveals that, oh, actually you've got a whole long way to go. And like, I think that might be the longest dungeon in the game. Like, I feel like that might felt to me even longer than the final dungeon.
I think it might have felt longer to you because there is this huge lead up to it as well, where you're going through the clouds.
Yeah.
And you're using the mole mitts to go through the clouds, which I thought was super fun. Like, the mole mitts are a really cool item that you get in this game, and obviously they reuse it in Skyward Sword. Funnily enough, Skyward Sword very tied to Minish Cap in the sense of the gust jar and the bellows, obviously, and the mole mitts and the gloves that you have in that game. And you were talking before about going on the lily pad across areas.
Yeah.
In Skyward Sword, there's the similar thing, but with lava, when you're rolling on the ball and getting through areas, like hitting switches to get that through places. So, interestingly enough, a lot of similarities between those 2 games, even to the point of, like, this Sky City.
And they're next to each other in the timeline.
Right, exactly. So maybe that was a lot of inspiration drawn there. Who knows? Maybe that's why all of this stuff was included. I don't think Nintendo think about things in that way, but you never know. I mean, they've confirmed a timeline, which is more than we ever expected them to ever do. So
you talked about the mole mitts, and like, I think that in general the items in this game, like, most Zeldas, they'll throw the boomerang and the bow and arrow at you straight away, and it's just like, oh great, I've got the boomerang and the bow and arrow. Like, this game, the first 3 items are the gust jar, which is completely different. You then get the cane of Paki, which is also completely different. It flips over enemies and items, and eventually the boss and things like that, and it's just a really unique item. And then for the Fortress of Winds, you get the mole mitts. So the first 3 stock items of this game are 3 brand new items that all do really different things in the dungeons, and you don't actually get the boomerang and the bow and arrow till like later on, so, and the bombs. So it's not like they just throw these generic items at you like most Zeldas unfortunately do. They kind of say, here are some really unique items, go and explore.
I don't even think the bombs or bow and arrow are dungeon items, are they? Like,
I
think
don't
that
think
they
so.
are like gotten outside of dungeons.
Yeah.
They're almost like you found the bomb bag or someone gave you the bomb bag or something, and the similar thing happens with the bow and arrow. Like, that's great. I like that those are just parts of Link's equipment that he just should have as a standard and not have to find in a dungeon.
Yeah.
And that they can save the more unique stuff for dungeons and make them more interesting because of that stuff. Absolutely.
And then you get the lantern with Temple of Droplets, which melts ice in quite a unique way. And then with obviously the Palace of Winds, you're getting the Rocks Cape, which is completely different to the Rocks Cape you get in Link's Awakening, because it actually glides, and you can do like these sort of run-up charge jumps using the Pegasus boots, which is another item you get outside the dungeons. So you're incorporating these items outside the dungeons with the ones you're using inside the dungeons.
Yeah, absolutely. It works really nicely, and he may not have the biggest of arsenal by the end of the game, but certainly much more unique one than many other Zeldas, which is
because you're using the items in tons of different ways, and I'm sure we'll get to the final boss eventually, but you're using all these items not just to do one thing, but the Cane of Paki can flip over, like I said earlier, pots or enemies or bosses. It's really cool.
Yeah, and that item is also unique in that if you fall down these little kind of potholes in the ground, you can basically infuse them with the magic of like reversal, and you basically hit it and then jump inside, and then it gives you like this super jump out of the hole to get up to platforms. So yeah, I do think that many Zeldas, such as Twilight Princess, are sinful of taking an item and using it in a dungeon and then forgetting about it and never bringing it up again. And this game doesn't do that. It kind of continues to make you use those items pretty significantly throughout. Which, yeah, I like that. I think that's a cool thing to do. Yeah, I mean, we're talking about kind of Link's abilities and the stuff he can do, there are those scrolls that you can find around the game by going to different like sword masters who teach you stuff. I didn't find these particularly useful, honestly. I didn't use many of them. By the end, I did go around and collect all of them, just for completion's sake and just to see what they were, so I had the context. But there is one where if you use the Rocks Cape, it becomes like it basically links down a move in Smash Brothers, and the same thing from Zelda 2, where he has his sword underneath him and he's like falling to the ground, kind of bouncing on top of an enemy. But with the perspective that you have in Minish Cap, it's really hard to pull off the timing on that, so it's a little bit weird. And similarly, there's one where you use the Pegasus boots to run, the Pegasus boots to run one is like the same thing that you do in Link to the Past, just holding your sword out in front of you. Which is like, in Link to the Past, that's just a thing he does. It's like, why are they making this an ability? Also,
I know why
is one of the abilities to smash pots and rocks? I don't really understand this. It was really weird, because when I started the game, I was like, oh, you can't smash pots in this game. That makes me sad. Or like, one of the best things about Zelda when you start it is you go into the first place you find and smash all the pots with your sword, right?
Yeah.
That's the great thing about it. And I couldn't. I was like, shit, am I gonna have to lift and throw pots this whole game? No, they lock slashing pots behind a scroll. That's so fucking weird. I didn't get it at all. It made no sense to me. I think a lot of those abilities were really like, what? Why are you locking this behind an ability? It just seemed like trying to, again, kind of adding stuff in a padding sense that wasn't kind of needed. It should have just been there as a thing that you had from the outset. Yeah, I mean, how many abilities did you get, Bally?
I think I got like 4 of them or 5 of them. I didn't 100% them. I definitely explored and found a few through exploring, which was cool. But I mainly got the ones where it's like Link to the Past, where you sort of send off a bolt when your health is full. And then I also got one which is the reverse, where you send off a bolt where you've only got 1 heart or less left. They're not particularly useful, and you're very rarely at either of those extremities of health, I found. So I don't know. It's all right. It's nothing special.
Nothing special. I think the final one that I got was the Great Spin, which is once you've done a spin attack, if you keep pressing the button, Link will move around and you can kind of direct him. That was very helpful for Dark Nuts in the late stages of the last dungeon. I just kind of spammed it, and you'd like sometimes get a chance of clipping one of them and getting a hit in. So that was a little useful. But yeah, as you say, not really. The instances to use them didn't come up enough to where they would be useful. So as opposed to something like Twilight Princess, where the backslice is like, my god, I have to use that move, none of these were that useful, unfortunately, and it just came down to just being standard Link and slashing most of the time, which is fine, and it worked, but hey, they could have implemented that stuff a little bit better. And I guess talking about stuff that they could have implemented a little bit better, let's start to move towards some of our kind of more negatives about the game, more gripes that we had. And we have an email from Brandon, who was a little bit more negative on the game. So Bally, do you want to read out what Brandon has to say?
Hey MBZ and Bally, this is Brandon from California. I've written a few times before, just finished Minish Cap for the first time and thought I'd add to the conversation. From what I've seen on Twitter, I fall closer into the MBZ camp. Can't say I enjoyed this game very much. It certainly had its fun points, however, I felt it got bogged down in how aimless it could be at times, and it explains itself very poorly. The lack of invincibility frames after taking a hit made for many a rage-inducing moment, particularly during that battle with 3 Dark Nuts right before Vaati. Overall, the bad parts made me so salty that when the good parts came around, I was in too much of a bad mood to enjoy them. Thanks for an excellent podcast. Can't wait to hear what the next Backlog Club game will be.
All right, Brandon. I think like the Twitter conversation he's mentioning is something that happened between us when I was quite early in the game, and there was a frustrating moment that I was just raging about, and Bali was like, "No, it's fine, it's great, everything's wonderful because it's Zelda." I'm definitely more positive than Brandon is on the game overall, but I see where he comes from. He mentions how it can be aimless at points and explains itself quite poorly. We were discussing before we started podcasting today about how there are many elements in Minish Cap which rely on you having knowledge from former Zelda games to be able to fully understand. I think that's why it's quite bad to just jump into Minish Cap as your first Zelda, because if you don't have that knowledge from games played before in the series, you may have a hard time with it. I think the first instance of this was when I had to get across the bog, the marshy bog area, and Eslo basically says, "Oh, we need some way to get across here fast," right? And the problem with that was it didn't really direct me in any area where I needed to go, what item particularly I needed to get, and what was necessary to get across that area. So anyone who doesn't think, hey, maybe there's an item in this game which is similar to other Zelda games which makes you move fast. What are those? The Pegasus boots. Okay, boots. Pegasus boots. Where would I get those? Okay, maybe I go talk to a person. Okay, there's a place in town that is a shop which has a shoe on the top. Okay, it's a shoe shop. Do I have to really go to the shoe shop to get the guy to give me Pegasus boots? And that turns out to be the case. And I did not think that was an easy assumption to make. I thought there was too many steps there to think this is what I need to do from this point to make the logical conclusion there, because in many Zelda games the Pegasus boots are gained in different ways, mostly from the overworld, from different people. Like in Link Between Worlds, you have to pop out between that or behind that guy who's running away from you, who clearly has them, and there are other areas and other places where you get them. I just felt that was an annoying, stupid part of the game, and I just looked up a guide for it because I wasn't going to wander around aimlessly, as Brandon mentions, forever. I know you thought a little bit differently about it, Bally.
I mean, I feel like even though I've played the game before, I had forgotten where you got the Pegasus boots. I knew that you needed the Pegasus boots to get across the bog, and I knew that you knew you needed to use the Pegasus boots to get across the bog, and the gripe that you're having is that you didn't know where to get the Pegasus boots, right?
Yes.
So
absolutely.
We're in agreement that we both knew we needed Pegasus boots, but we didn't know where to get them.
I guess. Yeah, sure.
So I just think that if there's a shop in the town that's got a big shoe on the top of it when you know that you need Pegasus boots, I don't personally see that as a flaw, but I completely agree with you that if you don't know you need Pegasus boots, that it is a flaw, because that is too much of a jump to make. But I think for someone who definitely has played a Zelda and knows that to run fast you use Pegasus boots, and that Pegasus boots there's a shoe shop, I think that's okay. But you're right, if you've not played Zelda before, that's too tough. But if you have played Link to the Past before, I think it's a good amount of clue, but not to give it away. And I think you definitely are in danger of giving it away too easily, and that there does have to be mystery in solving where to get certain items at times.
Right, I think it could have been better done though, because also, okay, so I didn't necessarily know that you had to get the Pegasus boots. Maybe this is my knowledge of Minish Cap before playing it kind of putting me in a bad position, because I knew that the Rocks Cape was in this game. So the alternative in terms of getting across wasn't necessarily just for the Pegasus boots. I could have been thinking, hey, maybe I need to get the Rocks Cape, in which sense going to the shoe shop makes absolutely no fucking sense in the world, right? Like, where am I going to get that instead? And obviously, later in the game, you have the Rocks Cape. The Rocks Cape is a better way of getting across that bog than using the Pegasus boots any day of the week. I'll tell you what, as someone who went back to find hidden stuff in that area afterwards, I used the Rocks Cape instead of the boots and had a way better time getting across. So again, there are multiple solutions here, and I don't think it points you in the right direction. I think it is more of that padding, because they don't have enough game here in terms of the overworld stuff. It's too small, it's too dense. And so they funnel you through to this area, and then they say, oh, by the way, go back again. And it's kind of pointless backtracking, instead of maybe making that area have a puzzle or have a kind of sub sort of mini dungeon you go through to get the item, and then to continue naturally forward through the swamp having the item with you, right? I think they just could have designed it better instead of, going on this side quest to find the boots, to go and collect a thing, to bring it back to a guy to make the boots. It felt like unnecessary collecting, right? And I don't like that in Zelda. I think that is egregious padding, honestly. So, yeah.
I disagree. And I know that you had a flaw with sort of the side questy parts of, well, they're side quests, but they're part of the main story where you have to fetch all the 3 books.
Yes.
And like they do actually implement a pseudo mini dungeon in that part, and other things like that. And they sort of do send you off to Lake Hylia and sort of his, the mayor's special holiday house and things like that. And I actually did like those sort of extra bits because it fleshes out sort of the character of the mayor, where he's like this guy who's obsessed by masks, and you see his masks in his house, but then you go to his other house out by Lake Hylia and it's just a house full of more masks. And I like that link. It's very simple and silly, but I thought it worked quite well.
And that's another problem in terms of having pre-Zelda knowledge with those masks, because there are points in the game where you have to knock them off the wall. And if you don't know that, in previous Zelda games, that if you run into something or roll into something, it'll knock it off, then you're just going to consider those masks a part of the background and something that cannot be interacted with. And I completely would never have thought of putting on the Pegasus boots and running into the wall, even as someone who's played Zelda before, because in other games like Skyward Sword, you use the roll to run into things and effect change on them, like trees and that kind of stuff. So I think, they could have done a better job, again, of explaining this stuff. And we talked again about likes, which can be a pain in the arse. And if you don't know about those, then, they're going to have these rupees that will trick you. Again, you kind of learn your lesson there, and then you're really cautious going forward to just slash any rupee that's above ground, just in case. And also just random walls that need to be bombed. They don't teach you the trick about kind of tapping the wall with your sword to see if there's a different sound being made that means you can bomb the wall. That is never explained whatsoever. So if you've never played a Zelda game before, you're never going to discover that.
I'm confident that there are Minish in the world that do tell you these things that we just didn't find.
Right, but you can't just put that on random NPCs when it's such a critical piece of information in the final dungeon which you can't get past otherwise, right? That you literally have to know that to get through the final dungeon, otherwise you'll be wandering around aimlessly forever. So they should directly tell you that stuff. You should be able to have that knowledge imparted to you, and they just don't do it. So, yeah.
I disagree. But
no, Bally, you can't disagree because it's a fundamental. No. You have to justify your disagreement. It's a fundamental design flaw. It's not something that is just, oh yeah, you could have just figured that out just randomly because that's just put bombs everywhere in this random room.
I disagree because a fundamental part of Zelda is getting stuck. Like, Zelda wouldn't be Zelda if you didn't get stuck. And
right, but there's a difference in getting stuck in a fair way and getting stuck in a way that they haven't.
You want to get stuck by them having a puzzle that you can't solve, whereas I'm happy to get stuck where there's something in the world that you need to interact with and then come back to somewhere else. We just have different interpretations of getting stuck, and I'm happy to get stuck in either way.
See, I feel that your version of getting stuck is also known as time wasting.
But my version of getting stuck, I feel, harkens back to classic Zelda and why
right,
so
but
many
you've also
people
talked
love
about
it.
how you fucking hate that in the original Zelda, that you have to randomly burn bushes, and that is exactly what this is. And I'm really shocked that you're defending it because it's the exact fucking same thing as burning random bushes in the original Zelda. It is, Valley. It is, and you are a hypocrite, and I will leave it at that.
I'm not a hypocrite in the sense that the big step up between the original Zelda and Link to the Past was this idea that you can poke the walls and that there will actually be a different sound. So there's that added level of exploration where you can tap a few walls, you identify that that's a weak point in the wall and bomb it. And Minish Cap copies on that, on exactly what Link to the Past does. I completely agree.
Right, but it doesn't tell you, and if you're someone who has never played Zelda before, you don't know that.
No, but I'm convinced that there's somewhere in that world that will tell you that you can tap walls. Whether it's Eslo or Minish or someone in the town, they will say, like, oh yeah, you can tap walls. And your sword will make a different noise.
If that exists, then they should do a better way of
Yeah,
leading
no,
to
I
that point. 'Cause
completely
not,
agree.
Not everyone's going to talk to every NPC.
I would completely
so.
agree, but I feel like you have a lot of gripes with this game that someone who hadn't played a Zelda would have. But seeing as you have played a previous Zelda, I'm surprised you're frustrated by them.
It's not necessarily that me personally is frustrated by them. I just think it's a bad thing to do if you're someone who's getting into the series.
Yeah, no, I agree.
I just want to point them out.
I agree, and I agree that this is a tough Zelda to play if you haven't played a Zelda before. But I think for someone who knows that you can tap your sword, I still do like having parts of the game where you do have to tap walls and there are hidden bombable areas and things like that, because those become more rewarding when you do discover them.
All right. Well, how about we talk about something which wasn't rewarding when we discovered it, which was a key item in a dungeon, again involving bombing a random wall. So this was something we both got stuck on, which is, I believe, the second dungeon. The key item is the mole mitts, and they don't lead you through an area where you kind of come across them after a mini-boss, as you traditionally do in many Zelda games. It is in a part of the game in the dungeon where you are on your way back from having done a small area to a central room, and it is a longer corridor. And yes, they do indicate with 2 pots that this is potentially an area
Skulls.
you can bomb. Or yeah, skulls actually, not even pots. 2 skulls, and in between the area is obviously you can bomb there. But when you're in that mindset of I've just gone through these rooms and I'm coming back to the center because you know from your map that's how it's that's how it works. I'm getting too wound up about this, I'll tell you what, Ballet.
I can tell.
You are just kind of gunning through, and I just went through, slashed the skulls because, I want some more hearts, obviously, because I've lost some hearts, and I get back to the center room, and I'm like, okay, I've just explored everything, what do I do now? And that is a bad design decision, to place that in this random corridor on the way back from an area. And not only that, the skulls don't respawn. So you could be wandering around forever thinking, where the hell do I need to go? It's so bad. It's so bad.
Right, key question, and I'm worried we're going to disagree again here. If the skulls did respawn at that point, would you be happy with that puzzle?
I would be happier with it.
Okay.
I wouldn't necessarily be happy with it, but I would understand it more, because it would then, if you're going through again, kind of figuring out what you need to do, and you come back to that point, you look at it at a second time and you think, oh, wait a second, this is an indicator here. So,
I agree.
Absolutely. But the fact that they disappear and don't come back, fuck, man, that is a bad decision, because then there is no indication and you're not even thinking in your brain that's a possibility.
There are 3 tiles on the floor.
And this is a key point in the dungeon. This is a key point in the dungeon. You need those items to get forward with the game.
There are 3 tiles on the floor, and basically on the left tile there's a skull, and on the right tile there's a skull, and then the middle tile is bombable. So even without the skulls, and I'm not going to argue this, I'm just going to play devil's advocate. Some would say that even without the skulls, you could work out that the middle point was bombable.
Yes.
But I completely agree that I would personally be perfectly happy with this little scenario if the skulls did respawn. But the fact they don't, I agree with you that it's too one step too far in terms of working out what to do next.
Yeah, it's a little bit frustrating, but yeah, I mean, there are things within the game that kind of get you bogged down, and you were talking about how there's a segment before the kind of the Palace of the Winds, which is you're going through the clouds and you have to collect all these doodads to make the wind blow up, and you thought I was going to be super frustrated by that, and I ended up liking that segment just because I liked the aesthetic of the area, and the
aesthetic saved the mechanics.
Yeah, and I also really like the idea of using the mole mitts for the clouds, like in this real kind of, candy sense of, like, when you're younger you think the moon's made of cheese and you think the clouds are made of marshmallows or whatever, it's that kind of idea of the clouds being physical and being able to kind of chomp through them. I just liked that imagery.
And they make exactly the same sound almost as the rocks.
Yeah. So I just thought that was really neat, and it wasn't hard because it was very linear, and there was only kind of one thing that I missed out on. It was pretty easy to find the error of my ways, and it was just kind of a chilled, relaxed segment. the reason I didn't like the book thing was, as we kind of were arguing over, they don't indicate clearly enough where you need to go to find the person. They say, there's a girl with a dog in the town. And I'm like, fucking why would you do that? I don't know where the girl with the dog lives. Now I'm going to have to waste my time going into these 20 different houses in the whole of Hyrule Castle Town to figure out which girl, which house, where do I need to talk to her. And if they just like put a mark on my map and said, this is the house you need to go to, perfect. They do that for every Kinstone thing where they mark it on your map and they're like, this is the location. If you forget, this is where you go. And just giving you this description of like, yeah, this is this girl, she has a cat or a dog or what fucking whatever. It was a waste of time. It was a fucking waste of time. And I just went to a guide because I didn't want to wander around and waste time for 15 minutes trying to find this person. You could argue, as you argued, oh, you need to wander around the town loads and get to know it and get to know where everyone is. But when all the houses are not that different aside from the color of the roofs, which doesn't help that much, and they're all in different places, and trying to keep track of who lives in what house is a little bit of a pain in the ass. So I was annoyed by that.
I think that's where me playing most of the game beforehand, even though it was years ago, I feel like you still have a vague memory of where's what in a town like that. And in general, I think sort of my spatial memory of certain things like that when it comes to maps and games and things isn't half bad. So I think I just kind of knew, oh yeah, she's there. She's the girl with the cat. I'll go there.
Yeah.
Did you spot any of the Easter eggs in this game?
No, Bally. You were kind of mentioning to me, like, there are all these Easter eggs popping up, and obviously, you know, Link's Awakening is a game ridden with that stuff. It's very overt. It's like, here's a chain chomp, and here's like a...
Well, I didn't... these were only Easter eggs I spotted. I didn't actually look up any. If we looked up some, I'm sure there are more out there that we didn't notice. But
right, throw some
one
at
I
me.
definitely noticed was... so do you know when there's this guy in one of the houses who's locks the door, and then you eventually get in and he's like writing? He's a doctor. And he's like writing on his desk. So did you...
Is that Professor Egad?
No. Did you find out what his name was?
I didn't.
So they eventually tell you his name is Dr. Left. And if you look at the style of his hair, he's got that crazy green hair with the like spikes. So he's
Is he from SimCity
exactly.
or something?
So Dr. Right is from SimCity, and this is his supposed brother, Dr. Left.
That's cool.
So that was one I spotted and I was chuffed with. Also, the three goddesses, Din, Nehru and Furore, also.
Well, they're not really a big part of this game, actually. Like, they're never talked about.
All three of them stay in the inn in different rooms at different times. Like you can go and meet all three of them. Yeah, and then
wait, so they're actual just personified characters as opposed to goddesses?
Exactly. They don't even talk about them being goddesses. They're just people in this game in the houses. Yeah, so you spot them. Those were the only two I spotted, but I just thought that was quite cool. And I'm sure there's way more.
That's really neat. It kind of keeps in the tradition of the handheld Zeldas being a little bit more off the cuff and able to do kind of more weird, out of left field stuff. So that's neat, and it's nice that Nintendo gave Capcom that freedom to actually touch on that stuff and deal with it. So yeah, that's cool. Yeah, so, I mean, is there any other kind of, like, gripes that you had with the game, Bally? Any other points that you thought were a little frustrating? You were saying that, again, there was some stuff, I guess, with getting the last bottle you thought was really annoying.
It was, I don't know. I think in order to get any four bottles in any Zelda game, the last one should always be a little more tricky. But this was just, you basically have to go and find... Kinstone pieces in walls, so you're fusing with the wall, and there are 6 Kinstone pieces in the wall across the world. You can only access using the mole mitts, and then by fusing those Kinstone pieces, Gorons appear in this sort of Goron mine, and you need 6 of them. So you basically need to go around the world to 6 different places to get 6 Gorons, and then come back to the Gorons, and you get a bottle. And it's fine. It's what it is. I don't think it's a massive downside. I just think it's quite a lot of hassle for one bottle. And
yeah, it's like you got these other 3 really easily. Why would you have to go through all that effort for just that last one?
Bottles in I think the final two dungeons of this game are pretty tough. Both the final bosses and the lead up and the mini bosses. So I do think you having 4 bottles for the end game is quite important. And maybe we could talk about the end game. Like, what did you think of the final dungeon and the final boss?
I think that it's appropriately difficult, and this is something that we kind of, going back and forth on as we were playing through. We were saying, like, Minish Cap feels like this lovely halfway house between Link to the Past and Link Between Worlds, where Link to the Past is kind of overly frustrating in areas and a little bit too stupidly difficult, and we kind of call back to that moth battle where the floor is moving and the spikes are moving and the fire is going and the moth is... And it's like this overload of holy fucking shit, how do I survive? And then you go to Link Between Worlds, where it's like, oh, this boss took me like 3 seconds and I didn't take any damage. So it's good because it's kind of rewardingly difficult. Like, it's not over the top and it's kind of satisfying in a way. I do think the final boss maybe pushes those boundaries a little bit too far, and is a little bit of a difficulty spike in some senses. Yeah. But again, it's more to do with figuring out what you have to execute on rather than the execution itself. And that's the problem going into it, is first time you'll be like, shit, I need to know what to do. And there are elements of that final boss, like when the eyeballs get covered with these kind of orbs, and the only way to get rid of those was to use the gust jar. And I was like, how am I ever going to think in my mind that that's the item I need to use to get rid of those? And again, later
in the first phase.
Yes.
Okay, I was getting confused with the second phase when you were talking about the gust jar layer. Yeah, no, I remember that. That was actually the one part I did. I worked out all the bits in the final boss, apart from using the cane of Paki in order to flip the arms on the third phase.
Yeah, and that's something that I was like, it's a little bit cheap, in the sense that you've gone through 3 Dark Nuts, you've gone through this first phase, and you've gone through this second phase, and everything has been done. If you get to that final phase, and you're like really low on life, and you're trying to beat him, and you've never done it before, I don't think anyone is going to figure out, use the cane of Paki to turn over his arms. And you're going to end up dying, and you're going to be frustrated, and you have to do the whole thing from the beginning again. And I just think, like...
it's like a good 15-20 minutes. Yeah.
Right. It's a little bit too cheap. I fortunately was looking at a guide, so I was like, fuck this, I'm just going to do it now, because I don't want to go through this whole thing again.
So you did it first time?
Well, I technically did it second time, because the first time I got too caught up and forgot to heal myself in the middle of the battle. So I just died. I was like, oh shit, oops, that was a bit of a pain.
So you did have to go back and do the rigmarole and...
Yeah, but it was only through the Dark Nuts again, and I didn't have too much trouble with them because... as we can kind of maybe segue into, I had found this nice item called the remote bombs, which you can only get by Kinstone fusing with the Elder of the Minish in the Deepwood Forest village, like much later in the game. So you can easily forget about that whole place. You can easily never go back there and never see this. But you Kinstone fuse with him, and this other Minish in another house is like, oh, I've created these remote bombs. And then you go to him, and basically you swap out your regular bombs for those, so they're a replacement, and they just detonate whenever you want. So you place them on the ground, and then you just press A and they detonate as soon as you want them to, which I think is such a great idea, and I'm super confused as to why they've never done this again in a Zelda, because every time that they upgrade the bombs in Zelda games now it's bigger, it does a bigger explosion. It's like, okay, great, like, it's bigger, but what does that really achieve? Whereas the remote bombs are a significant improvement in the quality of life of using those things, right?
But NBZ, there should be someone in the game that tells you to go back to
that. Absolutely, there should be. No. should we talk about the Kinstones then? Because that's kind of getting
Sure.
into this territory now, and how those kind of function. So we got an
another
email from
yes.
John from the Nintendo Show. I'll read this one out. He did a full blog post on Minish Cap, which he gave us an excerpt from. So John says, the way that Flagship constructed the world fascinates me. The familiar locations here are a forest, a mountain, Lake Hylia, but also some new places to explore, a bog, the sky. At first glance, there's not too much to do in the overworld. What nooks and crannies that are visible are blocked by obstacles that require a new tool to overcome, in typical Zelda fashion. However, the majority of places to explore are not blocked by obstacles, but locked away, only to be unlocked by interacting with NPCs and fusing Kinstone pieces with them. When a match is successfully made, the Kinstone pieces reveal a new place to explore, a new interaction to have, a new monster to fight, or a new useful item. Not all of Link's tools are acquired from dungeons. In fact, 2 of the most useful items in the game are completely missable if you're not fusing Kinstones. The non-sequitur nature of what happens after a successful fusion is what makes it so exciting and interesting to do. Running around and talking to NPCs may not always be the most interesting of mechanics in a Zelda game, but Flagship artfully designed a system that would make it more fun to explore a small world while simultaneously making one of the least interesting parts of a Zelda game the most satisfyingly distracting part of Minish Cap. I would backtrack to entire areas only to talk to everyone again to see if more fusions were available, which is one of the most delightfully sinister parts of the game. Even though you may have already fused pieces with an NPC, they may have another fusion or 2 available later. I really enjoyed this playthrough, looking forward to the next one. So, Kinstones, Bally. John seems to like them a whole lot, and sees that they kind of add to the purpose of NPCs in the world, that they're not just there to hand out dialogue, but they allow you to unlock new areas and get items such as heart pieces and that kind of stuff. How do you feel about Kinstones? Do you think that they're a cool aspect? Do you think they're kind of a waste? Do you think they're useless? Give me your thoughts.
They're good, but they're not almost something so good that I want to see in every Zelda. I think they work well in this game, but I think fans would get incredibly sick of them very quickly if they were implemented in some way in other Zeldas. Like, I actually really agree with John. They were really good in this game, and I did find myself going back and trying to do some extra Kinstones and things. I didn't do as many as yourself, but it's definitely rewarding, and collecting Kinstones, fusing them, and then going back. It's like a 3-stage process, and if you are prepared to kind of explore that bit more, and you might even discover a girl with a cat and know that to go back there later or something like that. Like, you do learn the world better, and the game really encourages you to learn that world and know where things are, and the Kinstones are just one part of encouraging that. So you are rewarded for exploration, which I like. But there are always other ways of rewarding exploration in other Zeldas that I prefer.
Right, I think the Kinstones work, again, because of how small and dense the world is you can open up a tree that, beforehand was just sitting there doing nothing in the middle of this area, and all of a sudden there's a wall that opens up and you can enter it, and there's a whole little place underneath. So it makes them have kind of new ground to cover, like a mini dungeon or something to that effect that they can just uncover. So they're neat. I actually thought before playing this game and hearing about people talk about the Kinstones that every Kinstone was unique, and that everyone you came across had to have a specific Kinstone. So I thought it was way more egregious than it actually is.
There's only about
in actuality,
20.
Right, and in actuality, if you're playing through the game just kind of casually and not going out of your way to get Kinstones necessarily, you'll come across pretty much every single one you need to fuse with people around the place, just, of your own accord. Which, it works. It means that by the end of the game, which is when I did kind of my collecting and getting more heart pieces stuff, it was pretty easy to just go up to people and be like, oh, I'm just going to fuse with you now, and I probably have that piece, so I don't need to worry about going and grinding and finding one randomly in a field, which that is a little bit of a problem at the beginning of the game when you kind of don't have any Kinstones, is if you want to do those fusions early, you're going to struggle. You're going to have to just sit there and grind forever and ever, which is not fun, and it's not really kind of the main purpose. But I guess going back to, the point you made is like, oh, surely someone should have told you about those remote bombs. And I think that they could have made those items a little bit, I think that item in particular, a little bit easier to come across, in the sense that in other Zeldas, when you're upgrading those items, like in Link Between Worlds, you go to the Mai Mother and hand in the things, and then you can choose which item to upgrade. And it's made very obvious, and
everything is very obvious in that game, isn't it?
Yeah, yes, yeah. Like, you know that there's a place to go to upgrade this particular thing. This was pure coincidence for me and randomly running across it. And yet the item is one of the most useful for the entire end game, and I think it's why I had an easier time going through that dungeon than you did, because they are like the kryptonite to those dark nuts. Bombs will kind of knock them out for a second and allow you to get a free hit in, and with the remote bombs you don't need to worry about timing them at all. You just lay them down, wait for them to walk over it like idiots, and then explode, and you just wail on them. So yeah, it kind of sucks that you didn't find those, Bally, because it would have made.
I think I knew of. I subconsciously knew of them. I don't think I got them on my last playthrough, but I think I knew of them from looking at guides beforehand or something. So I don't know, but part of me still feels quite chuffed that I defeated all those dark nuts with just a sword and my shield, just fighting away at them.
Right, grinding it out.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely, using pure skill.
Pure skill. Pure skill.
Yeah, yeah. The other one was the magic boomerang, which you get by talking to all of the Tingles, like David Jr., everyone's favorite Tingle, and other guy. I can't remember their names.
He's called David Jr.
Weird. There's one of the Tingles is called David Jr. I have no idea. So yes, that is more obvious, because the way it works is each of the Tingles opens up one of 4 trees in the kind of the main Hyrule Castle area above the town, and then you kind of, once you've got all 4 of them, you light up the switches and you get a magic boomerang and blah blah blah. That item is nowhere near as useful as the remote bombs, but they're way more obvious and easy to find, so I guess more people probably came across that. Yeah, so Kinstone stuff, it's neat, and it serves its purpose here, but rightly, as you said, I think that it's one of those things that may not work in every Zelda game, especially not in a 3D Zelda. I don't think it would work very well there. I just think because the nature of this game and its density, it fits, and it fits pretty well. So, yeah, Kinstones are cool. They look nice. There's certain satisfaction I found to just like when they click together, you know, the sound design there, like shing, and kind of clicking into place. I don't know, weird stuff like that satisfies me. You know, the Molmit sounds, the clinking of the.
I think for all the amiibo fans out there, the collectors, I think Kinstones are like this little sub amiibo collecting inside a game. That I think.
Well, if you want to talk about amiibo, you can talk about the figurine collecting in this game, which is just.
I feel like they tried to copy it from Wind Waker, where it's incredibly successful, and obviously the way you get them in Wind Waker is different, where you take the photos and then get a figurine. In this game, you're just collecting mysterious shells in order to trade them. You're putting them into basically a slot machine in order to get figurines.
Yeah, it's way less involved. Yeah. It's way less interesting, and it does feel like a bit of a kind of, hey, if you really want to get the real 100%, you better play this game for 200 more hours to get the real 100%.
And I mean, it's having a massive figurine collection, it could be quite cool, and like it is nice that they have all the sprites sort of stored somewhere in that game where you can go back and look at them if you want.
Do they have any kind of text or dialogue or whatever?
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's like massive text just description for every single figurine, and each figurine.
So it's basically like Smash Brothers trophies, essentially.
Yes, but turn every single character, enemy, boss, diorama in the game into a figurine, and then give it a load of text, and then turn it into you got all these figurines that you can look up. So it's okay. It's not great, but I've not got anything massively against it.
I have to say, at the end of the game, when I had all my items and I had the ability to warp to areas which we didn't even talk about, is you get there's an ocarina in this game, surprisingly, not very original with the instrument choice here, but as every Zelda has.
Do they even call it an ocarina? I feel like they call it.
It's called the Ocarina of Wind.
Oh, is it?
So
okay.
It is. Yeah, it's called the
Ocarina
of Wind.
Link to the Past, I think it's called a flute.
Oh, really? Interesting. But it's basically the same thing, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's called the Ocarina of Wind in this game, and you can just kind of warp around the different warp points. it felt weirdly kind of Super Metroidy in the sense that I have everything I need, and like if I see a secret, I can just go and get it because I can now turn into small Link and go in the water, not drown. I can push heavy objects. I can use the mole mitts to get underground. Yeah, lots of stuff that was really satisfying, and kind of I sat there with a podcast, had a guide open, and was like, okay, let's just knock out these heart pieces, knock out these tingle guys, get the scrolls, get the Gorons. I just enjoyed it. It was just kind of a relaxing thing, and I didn't have to worry too much. Going back over the overworld, there's not too many difficult enemies, so yeah, it was cool. It's a nice kind of feeling at the end of the game, which generally when it comes to Zeldas, I don't usually go back and try and find all the heart pieces and everything. Like even generally the first run through I don't anyway.
You were in Backlog Club mode. You decided.
Yeah, and I did feel like the fact that we're doing this segment and we're kind of going in depth and talking about this game, I felt kind of an obligation to do that and to try and explore as many elements as I can. And I'm glad I did, because otherwise we never would have been able to talk about things like the remote bombs, because both of us would have missed them, and neither of us would have kind of known that they existed. So yeah, cool stuff, absolutely.
Shall we get to some tweets?
Yeah, I mean, do you want to kind of talk about the end game, kind of the post game, real quick? I thought it was a neat touch at the end that once Eslo turns back into kind of the Minish guy, he's like, hey. I know I'm going to be a guy now, so I can't be your hat anymore. Here's a hat. And then it's like, oh my god, that's the hat. That is like the instance of him getting the actual Link hat at the end of the game. I love that.
Yeah, that was cool. And a lot of theorists about the timeline basically think that there is a gap between... Now let me get this right. I think the gap is between Skyward Sword and Minish Cap. So the story that you see at the start of Minish Cap, according to hardcore Zelda fans, hasn't actually ever happened in a Zelda game. So it's quite interesting. I mean, obviously we're talking about the post game, and I'm talking about the pre-game all of a sudden. But
yes.
But apparently the pre-game story in the build-up is a potential time block that could be taken up by a future Zelda game. But yeah, I do agree that it's quite cool that you get the hat and it's like ta-da, because he's been your hat the entire game. And I love all the credits with the stained glass windows and things look really nice.
Yeah, it's wonderful. It's cool art style. So yeah, let's get a few tweets then from other people.
It seems that we did get quite a few tweets under the hashtag Backlog Club, so it's really good that others were playing along with us. So Soothing Leaves said, finally finished Minish Cap, Backlog Club, very excited to hear MBZ and Bally debate it, can't say I enjoyed it TBH. Well, there's a negative one.
Well,
Ryan Birkland, the Minish Cap sprites look great and the whole game is very colourful. The Kinstones were an amazing side quest addition. Hashtag Backlog Club. Yeah, so
a bit more positive there.
Definitely.
Kinstones.
Sullivan, I played Minish Cap a year and a half ago. Solid, if not forgettable, for a Zelda game. So a bit mixed there. Twan Van, I can't even, VUGT Voot. Okay. Shall we go with Voot? How would you say it?
Bally doesn't matter.
Twan
Let's just
Van
keep rolling.
Voot. I loved Minish Cap on GBA. Had some interesting items and mechanics. Wilson NG. Minish Cap is the first Zelda I finished completely. So fun and whimsical without taking itself too seriously. Super smooth too. Green Oak says, I enjoyed the two boss fights that incorporated the Minish mechanics. Swapping between sizes in the fights was an enjoyable change in pace in the fighting sequences. And
yeah, we agreed with that. That was really cool.
And then new dash drag said, even though there aren't as many dungeons as other Zelda games, I think they make up for it in quality. I wasn't bored by any dungeon in this game, which was super cool. Yeah, I think we broadly agree with most of those. Definitely some people not a big fan of Minish Cap, and like I think in general it's a tough Zelda. And what's really interesting is that it was launched in 2004, and like most modern Zeldas are pretty straightforward, and I don't think this is a straightforward game.
Right, but I think it's tough but fair in the sense that Link to the Past feels a little bit, holy shit, why are you doing this to me right now? And, we talked about you having to go outside of the dungeon to get magic to beat a boss, where they didn't provide it to you right there. Minish Cap does a great job of being like, okay, we're right before the boss, we're going to give you a fairy, and you can go and fill up your bombs if you want to, and, there are hearts available, and you can kind of... We have a really conveniently placed warp point, which I thought the final dungeon did excellently, which is like, you can go back to the entrance.
And they used multiple warp points. You always get a blue one and a red one.
A red one, yeah. So you could have multiple points of kind of taking a break and going back, which was wonderful and just really good for a handheld game. It makes sense in that sense, because you need to sometimes, your mother's calling you for dinner and you can't, you got to
Wi-Fi's
save it
going
somewhere.
And it's just
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I think that Minish Cap is a better game than Link to the Past, and I know that's probably blasphemous to say for some people, but I genuinely enjoyed it more than playing Link to the Past, and I think it has many redeemable qualities. There are certainly flaws, as we discussed, and things that annoyed us about the game, me more so than Bally, of course, because Bally is just an apologist of everything.
I think I fought my corner well.
But it was fun, and I think this has been a good segment. I've enjoyed doing this Backlog Club.
Yeah, this has been great.
Good to see people on Twitter talking with us about it, and we went back and forth and had like a long Twitter argument about it, which people could watch, and they mentioned that in an email. So
really positive, fun. And like I feel like we have. We always dissect every episode games we've been playing, but I feel like this gives us a real chance for a really real quality game to actually delve deep into the structure and design of a game like this. So it's just really nice that we've now got this segment occasionally where we can delve deeper.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes the problem with our kind of talking about games we've played recently is sometimes I'll go off on one and not be able to talk that much about it on my own because Bally won't have anything to say on the subject because he has no context for it. And obviously, like we try and keep that segment, shorter than what this has been, obviously. So we don't, get to kind of dig deep into all the.
But we really hope that
you've
enjoyed listening to it and have played. If you've not played along at home, but at least enjoyed. Us talking about this game for so long, and hopefully you might have a go at the next game we decide to delve deep into in the Backlog Club.
Yep, and we'll absolutely do another one of these, so we'll be sure to talk about that when it happens. Yeah. Anyway, that is going to be our show for this week. So thank you very much for listening. You can find us in the usual places on the Twitters. We can be found. Bally, where can people hear about your thoughts?
I'm at Ballyman91, BALLYMAN91.
And on the Miiverse.
Yes, of course. I don't even say that anymore. I just think people know that already.
It's assumed knowledge. You can find me on the Twitter. I'm at Lordnbz. Lordnbz is the Miiverse as well. We're on iTunes. If you could give us a review on iTunes, that'd be real nice. We haven't had any recently, and we'd like to kind of beef that up. So if you've been thinking about doing it, meaning to get to iTunes, thought, I should probably do that at some point.
So I'm not going to give them a review until they do that Backlog Club segment they've been talking about for months.
Yeah, absolutely. But we've delivered on our promise now, so how about you deliver on yours and give us a review, and we'd appreciate that. Obviously, you can find us on iTunes and get the show every 2 weeks there. It'll directly download to your podcast app of choice.
And check out the podcast Twitter, at TNL Podcast.
Yes, that is a good place to find all of our thoughts and Twitter arguments and other such things. Fun times happening there. So yeah, at TNL Podcast. We have an email address as well, Bally. Where can people send those for next time?
Send all your emails to ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com.
Indeed, and that is pretty much it. You can find us on Stitcher, on YouTube, all these different places. We're on the internet and in your ear holes, and that's where we live. So that's that. All right, well, we will see you next time. Thank you very much for listening, and hope you enjoyed this. It was fun show to do, fun segment. So until then, goodbye.
we once tricked. We once almost tricked one of the teachers. Who was it? It was the religious studies teacher.
Okay.
She's like, I can't remember the web address, and someone, I think it was like KD, put up his hand. It's just like, Miss, I think you're looking for Penn Island, and she like started typing it into Google, and we're all just dying.
Oh my god,
like, what?
that's great.